If you were born between 1976 and 1985, there's a good chance you've spent your life standing at the edge of two worlds. You remember life before the internet became a constant hum, when mixtapes and dial-up connections were part of your rhythm. But you also grew up alongside technology, learning to navigate emails, social media, and smartphones as if they were second nature. It's a strange place to exist, sometimes feeling too old for the newest trends, and yet not quite old enough to dismiss them. And that, if nothing else, shapes the way your mind works. Psychologists call it a microgeneration phenomenon. Some even hint that growing up in this in-between space leaves a subtle imprint on identity, decision-making, and how you connect with the world around you. You've probably noticed it in yourself, too. The sense that you carry two conflicting timelines inside you. One part of you still craves the simplicity of the pre-digital era, where friendships were measured by face-to-face moments rather than likes or reactions, and the other part. It's comfortable adapting, thriving even, in a fast-moving, screen-saturated world. It's why you might find yourself nostalgically listening to a cassette tape one moment and streaming a playlist the next, almost without noticing the shift. This tension isn't just cultural, it's psychological. Researchers have observed that Xennials often embody what's called a cusp generational mindset. Being born on the cusp between Gen X and Millennials doesn't just mean a birth year. It means your brain learned a very different ways of interpreting the world. One is cautious, patient, and skeptically hallmark of Gen X. The other is collaborative, adaptable, and socially aware, which echoes millennial traits. And here's the kicker. You carry both sets of wiring. Sometimes, in conflict, think about your work habits for a moment. Maybe you're incredibly self-reliant, preferring to solve problems on your own. But at the same time, you're drawn to teamwork, brainstorming, or bouncing ideas off a group. This duality isn't indecision, it's a reflection of your upbringing, straddling analog and digital life. You learn to do things manually, to rely on yourself, and yet also learn to share, network, and be visible in a world where connection is digital and instantaneous. Some psychologists suggest that this balancing act has left Xennials with a unique type of resilience. You can move between modes of thought almost instinctively, but it comes at a subtle cost. That cost shows up in how you handle stress or uncertainty. You might notice a persistent feeling that you're always catching up, even when objectively you were doing fine. Part of it is generational. You grew up with a world where stability was promised: jobs, pensions, routines. But then came an era of economic uncertainty, rapid technological change, and a constant influx of information. That juxtaposition, predictability while navigating volatility, creates a quiet, internal friction, and it can make Xennials unusually self-conscious, prone to overthinking, or even quietly anxious about whether they're keeping up. And here's an interesting split you might recognize. Some Xennials respond to this tension by leaning inward. They build self-contained routines, value privacy, and approach life with a cautious pragmatism. Others swing outward, embracing technology, networking extensively, and often projecting confidence, if inside, they feel that same tension. Neither approach is better, but each signals a different psychological adaptation to being caught between worlds. Now, here's the subtle question that many Xennials never confront. Which one are you really? Do you lean inward, craving quiet control, or outward, seeking connection and visibility? And do you ever feel like the version you show the world isn't fully aligned with the version that exists in your own mind? Part of what's happening is developmental. Erik Erikson, the psychologist who describes stages of psychosocial growth, suggested that identity formation during late adolescence and early adulthood is heavily influenced by the surrounding environment. Xennials came of age in a moment where analog norms were fading and digital norms were rising. Your identity didn't form under one set of rules, it was constantly negotiating between two. And BK. Humans are wired to seek coherence and identity. You may sometimes feel a quiet inner tension, like two maps are overlapping in your brain, and you're trying to read them both at the same time. Culturally, this plays out in fascinating ways. Xennials are often nostalgic, but not in the same way Gen X tends to be. There's a bittersweetness to it. You might romanticize VHS tapes or Saturday morning cartoons, but you also know, in a very immediate, almost practical way, how the digital world works. That duality gives you perspective that younger generations may lack. You can understand the allure of a simpler time, yet you're not blinded by it. You recognize the complexities, the trade-offs, the irony, and sometimes that insight comes with a small, quiet frustration. And here's another layer. Evolutionary psychology suggests that humans are naturally pattern-seeking, and that major environmental shifts, like moving from an analog to a digital world, activate adaptive stress responses. In other words, Your brain learned to scan for both risk and opportunity, constantly negotiating between past habits and new demands. For Xennials, that might explain why you can switch between deep focus and rapid multitasking, but also why you occasionally feel mentally exhausted in ways that don't make sense to others. You're carrying cognitive load that comes from navigating two worlds simultaneously. Now, let's get a little uncomfortable. Have you noticed that some days you feel like an outsider in both worlds? Too old for the newest apps, too young for the old school norms. That feeling isn't just about age. It's a reflection of living in the in-between, and it can subtly influence your relationships, your career decisions, even how you perceive your own worth. Some Xennials brush it off with humor or sarcasm. Others feel it more deeply, internalizing a quiet sense of misalignment. And the fascinating thing is, most people around you don't quite see it, they just see the behaviors, not the undercurrents shaping them. Here's where it gets even more interesting. Studies on generational microclimates, like those done by sociologists Neil Howe and William Strauss, suggests that cusp generations often develop hybrid cognitive styles. That means you're unusually skilled at understanding both analog and digital contexts, empathizing across age groups, and synthesizing seemingly contradictory information. But here's the subtle paradox. That skill can make you highly adaptive, yet simultaneously leave you feeling chronically in between. You see perspectives clearly, but you rarely feel entirely anchored. If you've stayed with me this far, here's a gentle challenge. Notice how you respond to change. Do you resist it reflexively, yearning for the stability of the world you first knew? Or do you embrace it, sometimes more eagerly than you realize, almost as if to prove to yourself that you belong in this new era? And then consider how that tension shows up in your personal life, the way you interact with family, with coworkers, even with strangers online. That quiet inner friction isn't a flaw. It's a map. It's telling you something essential about how you think, how you adapt, and how you navigate the subtle currents of your life. Xennials often describe this experience with a wry sense of humor. They joke about remembering life before before Google knew everything. But underneath the jokes is a profound awareness. You've lived through transformation, not once, but twice. You've adapted to a changing world while also holding on to the values and perspectives of a previous one. That duality gives you a unique lens on life. You're simultaneously observer and participant, skeptic and believer, cautious planner, and adaptable improviser. And if you pay attention, you might notice that this lens shapes every choice you make, even the ones that feel automatic. So, I'll leave you with this. Take a moment to reflect on which version of yourself dominates. Today, they're one shaped by analog patience, by careful observation and quiet resilience, or the one honed by digital agility, rapid adaptation, and visible connection. And then ask yourself, do you honor both? Or does one quietly eclipse the other, leaving that subtle, nagging tension that only someone who straddles worlds can recognize? If this resonates, it's not just about nostalgia, or about technology, or even about age. It's about understanding yourself in a way that most people never stop to do. So consider leaving a comment below. Are you the inward-leaning, quietly cautious type, or the outward-reaching, digitally fluent one? Or maybe, like many Xennials, you're a little bit of both, every day. And if you find this kind of reflection useful, stick around. You might discover just how much more there is to understand about the world and about yourself when you learn to read between the generational lines.